So, the last time I made a top 10 weapons video, it not only became by far my most popular Save the World video, but as I record this is on its way to be my most popular video on my entire channel, and that video is great. I really don't want to change much. I'm going to link this spreadsheet in the description below because a lot of weapons got changed and rebalanced, and this list will be with these changes considered. Most everything stays the same in here, but I'm going to mention some stuff later on that you might want to hear, especially including our number one pick for this video, so stay tuned for that. Of course, timestamps will be in the description below, covering all the weapons that I cover, including honorable mentions, but I encourage you to watch through the entire video, as I do like to explain myself and why I picked what I picked. Now, on why I picked what I picked, a lot of the weapons on this list, in fact, all of the weapons on this list are event weapons. So obviously I got the Bazooka, Siegebreaker, etc. Those will be mentioned in this video, of course, but number 1 through number 10 and every single thing that was a tie is or was an event weapon, and most of those are currently not obtainable in the game. There are weapons like the Silent Spectre, Bobcat, Hacksaw, all of those are military weapons. Those are available in the expansion section. You can't get these from normal llamas, but you can research them. But I wanted this weapon to specifically be non-event weapons, because this expansion section is, of course, an expansion section. It can be changed in the future. They'll be adding more weapons to this, but as I'm aware, I don't think they've added anything to the base game weapon set, or at least it's extremely rare. Like, I know that they've added the Dragon Pistol, but that was a very, very old event. And then, of course, they have the Typewriter in here, but you can't actually research this, so that's really more of an honorable mention I'll talk about at the end, and not really something that'll be in this actual list. And the last thing I want to mention here is that they have expanded on some of the base game weapons, like the Anti-Air Trap and the Tar Pit, but those kind of went away from their events and have been fully added to the game as a normal weapon that you can use, which I'm personally happy about. I think the broadside should be available to everybody and not locked behind an event, because it's an amazing wall trap. However, I do have a couple of disclaimers. Traps will not be on this list, because while I do consider them weapons, as they usually do damage and are something that you can use in an offensive manner, they really don't fit in with this kind of list, and it's really not fair to compare a broadside and like a Siegebreaker, because while they are, you know, things that do damage, they're very, very different things and not something I really want to compare. And while I did mention that I'm not going to be covering the expansion schematics, I'm definitely going to say that I'm not covering the mythic weapons, because they're all great. I don't want to rank these weapons. I don't think there is a best mythic weapon. I think the Scourge is one of the best ARs in the game. The Onslaught is the best pistol, best sword, hammer. You see what I'm saying? That's the best rocket launcher. In that list, just like this one, I will not be covering the Storm King's weapons. And one last thing I want to mention before we get into the list is that my best perks videos for all of these weapons will be in the description below. That's actually why this video has taken so long. I think I've been teasing this in my videos and streams for a few weeks now, but I really wanted to make sure I had all my boxes checked. A lot of these base game weapons aren't something we use every day. A lot of people forget about them. Many of these are, you know, superseded by event weapons, which is why my overall top 10 list was mostly or entirely non-base game weapons. There are just better options out there, which surprisingly enough made this a very competitive list, because there are some definite hidden gems in here, and you'll definitely see what I mean later on. But yeah, I wanted to make some time to make videos on all of these, so all of those videos will be linked in the description below. So coming in at our number 10 slot is the Super Shredder, which is kind of an underhanded pitch to start this list, because it's not an extraordinary weapon, but after the 12.0 update, it actually does a very considerable amount of damage. This thing is going to basically be your early Twine, Canny, Plankerton, Stonewood zone kind of sniper for one-shotting miss monsters. It's a very, very good secondary weapon to whatever primary you're using, and it'll be very effective at taking out the higher health enemies that might give you some trouble. It's not fantastic as a primary weapon, hence why it's in the number 10 slot, but I know that a lot of people might have wanted to see this friendly face, and I wanted to give it its time in the spotlight. And in our number 9 slot, we have the Deathray, which surprised even me. I didn't think this one would make the list, but believe it or not, as I'm going to be saying throughout this entire video, with the 12.0 changes, they gave it quite a sizable damage increase, which puts it right up there, but not quite, tied with some of the best weapons in the game. In fact, I can actually go to my backpack storage here. A lot of the gameplay you're seeing here is from the Deathray that was gifted to me by Jolie. I appreciate her supporting me here. You can see that I'm going to compare the DPS here, which is not something I usually recommend, but based on the crit build that I have here, it's essentially identical to the Siegebreaker that I have running. They have basically the exact same perks, and you can see that the Siegebreaker has quite a little bit more DPS, which, assuming we have the exact same perks, you can tell that the output is going to be just under the Siegebreaker and not quite as powerful, but it is certainly a decent option if you want an excuse to use some energy cells, use a different weapon. It is a very accurate weapon. It is very, very good at just doing overall damage. It is a Deathray. It's basically like firing a laser beam, which makes it very unique in this game, and it's cool that a weapon like this can actually be pretty viable in the 140 zones now that it's been updated. And because it's limited to energy and it'll be less damage than a lot of the weapons I'll be covering later, that's why it is in our number 9 slot. Now, following that DPS number, we're actually going to the Viper, which is kind of an interesting topic, because if you compare it to the Siegebreaker with identical perks, it actually technically has higher DPS, which means in general this will be a harder hitting weapon, but in actuality it just makes up for low damage with a very high fire rate. And with the accuracy of the Viper, I don't think that this is any kind of top tier weapon, but it will do a lot of damage very effectively. It's something you can totally perk up and use in all of your missions going well into late twine. It's just that it'll have a little bit less damage per bullet with a higher fire rate to make up for it. You'll be reloading a bit more often because of that, and it'll have a not super great accuracy. So for close range combat and short bursts of high damage, the Viper is a very, very solid pick in our number 8 slot. For our number 7 pick, it's already getting very competitive because this is one of the strongest weapons in the game. The Monsoon has a monstrous 150,000 DPS in my inventory, which, to compare, the Siegebreaker only has 119,000. If you haven't noticed already, I've used the Siegebreaker as kind of a baseline for a lot of the weapons I covered here, seeing as the base game weapons didn't have a lot of variability in the perks that you can pick for these weapons, so it's basically why I'm running the exact same perks on all of these. And I want to expand on that because when you have the exact same perks for both weapons, you can actually look at the in-game DPS, because when they're spec'd the same way, neither one of those weapons is really going to pull ahead in the end game. If the perks are the exact same, then there's really no chance for one of those to win out, so this is the only time that I actually trust the in-game DPS. I almost always crunch the numbers myself if the weapons have different perks on them. However, with the Monsoon, you can see that it's actually a lot higher than the Siegebreaker, so what gives? Well, the Monsoon is basically like a pocket minigun. Once you get going, this thing will absolutely shred. With a mag size perk on this, I'm getting over 105 bullets in the magazine. In my video, I explain more on how I get that to be even higher. I'll link that in the description below, of course. And this thing is a monster once it's spinning. Of course, that is one of the drawbacks. It's just like the Viper in that it has a low damage per bullet and a very, very high fire rate. In fact, it actually has the highest base fire rate in the game. At 18 shots per second, this thing is insane. You give it another fire rate perk, and it can be one of the fastest firing weapons in the game. Not quite, as there are weapons like the Bobcat, which has a base 15 fire rate, and it has 2 fire rate perks on it, which can make it go quite a bit faster. But the Monsoon is extremely powerful once it gets going, and of course that spin up is honestly why it's in the number 7 slot, because it's not something that you can just pull out and start shooting. It does require you to wait a little bit of time because of that spin up, but it's an amazing weapon once it gets going, and that is why it is secured in our number 7 slot. In our number 6 slot, we have our very first tie. So my Roomsweeper and Tigerjaw are spec'd differently. Fire rate and damage has identical damage output in the end to crit rate and crit damage, so I prefer to go fire rate on mine, so I can't specifically show you the numbers here. Of course, their videos will be linked below, but believe it or not, the Roomsweeper and the Tigerjaw pretty much level out in the end. The Roomsweeper is a higher fire rate, much more fun weapon to use in my opinion, but it has less accuracy, and the Roomsweeper, I believe, technically has the highest damage per second of any shotgun in the game once you take its overall damage output divided by its time spent reloading, which makes it a very, very powerful weapon. However, you are only doing that much damage at about 5 to 10 feet in front of you, which makes this a super close range, high damage output weapon. On the flip side, the Tigerjaw does a little bit less fire rate, about half the fire rate, but it does more damage per shot. It has a bit more of an effective range, and it's a lot more comfortable and consistent to use. That's actually why I have 1 Roomsweeper with energy and fire rate, and then I've of course gone for 3 Tigerjaws, 1 for every single element. The Tigerjaw is a phenomenal weapon, but so is the Roomsweeper, and in the end, they are basically the same weapon. The way I lay it out is one does more damage, shoots slower, the other one shoots faster, does less damage. You can use whichever one you prefer, but I think that they are a good tie for our number 6 slot. Now for our number 5 slot, I think we're going to have a bit of a surprise. So in the top 10 weapons video, spoiler alert, my number 1 slot was given to the rocket launchers because they are absolute powerhouses. If you put the cost aside, they are hands down the best weapons in the game, and you're not going to change my mind. But in the base game section of the game, you quite literally only have the Bazooka and the Thumper, and these weapons are very powerful. The Bazooka is a powerhouse, as you can imagine. The Thumper is fantastic for crowd clearing and not really great against single target damage. I cover more of that in its specific video in the description below. But both of these weapons are, in my opinion, best to be support weapons. So whatever weapon you're going to be using is your primary. Use like a Baron for movement if you have that weapon, or maybe Coconuts from Crossbones Barrett, or anything in the middle slot, whatever you want to do. And then a rocket launcher on your third slot, or wherever you want to put it in your hotbar, as a secondary weapon to be eliminating crowds of enemies. So you'll have a main primary weapon to do your regular damage output, and then if you have a crowd of zombies or bigger targets, you can use a bazooka as a secondary. I don't actually think it's better than your main weapon, though. That's kind of why they're down here in the number 5 slot, because I do think they're extremely good weapons, but as I said, this list gets very competitive towards the top here, and it's maybe not going to be your primary, as there are better options. We finally made it to the Siegebreaker in our number 4 slot. The Siegebreaker is something I am so happy to talk about, because believe it or not, it is so much better than people think it is. It used to be a joke, kind of a meme in the late twine for us to say like, "Ooh yeah, best weapon in the game, Siegebreaker, go use that, LOL." It's actually pretty good. In fact, it was pretty good before they gave it a 12.5% damage increase with that 12.0 update. So it's nowadays a very capable weapon. You could bring this to the 144 players, and it might not be your best option. I'm not going to BS you there, but it is a very good weapon that can work just as well. And oh, look at that. I've been comparing it to the Terminator this entire time, and that's because it's a little tough to show you with blue perks, but on the spreadsheet I can show you that the Terminator actually has almost the exact same damage output, just a little bit lower. And these weapons, as you can see back to my screen here, do have the exact same crit chance once these are perked up all the way. They'll have the exact same fire rate and a much higher mag size for the Terminator. So if you want basically the LMG version of the Siegebreaker, the Terminator is a fantastic counterpart. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the Terminator is very comparable to the Hacksaw, which was tied for the number 2 slot in my overall top 10 weapons video. So the Terminator is a very good choice if you haven't used it already, and so is the Siegebreaker. These are 2 weapons you should give another look. Our number 3 pick won't surprise anybody who's been watching my streams lately. The Stabsworth the III is coming in at our number 3 slot. This is the first and only melee on our list, and for a reason. Most of the melees in the base game weapons are trash. They're garbage. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. Most of them are pretty useless, and I have never seen them get any use, but the Stabsworth is unique, because much like the Monsoon, it actually has the fastest attack speed of any sword in the game. Like I was saying with the Monsoon, though, there are weapons like the Spectroblade. When you go Bright Core and triple attack speed, it can have a faster attack speed. Without any attack speed perks, the Stabsworth actually has a base 0.4 attack speed, which if that has no context, I can't blame you. If you go and compare it to the Storm King's Ravager with an attack speed perk, that brings it all the way down to 0.4. So what I'm saying here is your attack speed is almost identical to a weapon with an attack speed perk before you've even started giving it perks. I can also show my Spectroblade has an attack speed perk and is only slightly faster than the Stabsworth. So you can imagine with 2 attack speed perks that this thing can get going very fast. Now, the caveat to this is most of how I use the Stabsworth is double attack speed with Paleoluna in the lead. Of course, Paleoluna isn't early game friendly, because if you don't have her from the Dino Heroes event, then you are not going to get the most use out of this weapon in that build. But if you just go damage, crit rating, crit damage, you don't even need the attack speed perks on this thing. It'll be a perfectly good weapon, and it'll do tons of damage. Obviously, I think double attack speed or single attack speed damage, whatever you want to do, I have a whole video in that description below where I get all into the nonsense of this. It can be a lot more effective, but if you don't have Paleoluna, then crit rating, crit damage is a perfectly good way to go, and this thing will be a fantastic sword. A lot of you might not agree with this being in the number 3 slot, but I think it's worth a little bit of recognition. With thanks again to Jolie, I present to you the Stampede, which if you look at the stats on screen is identical to the Huskbuster. You can see that these weapons are effectively identical. The only difference being the Huskbuster is a cheaper version that actually has better ammo efficiency, so it'll be a lot more cost effective to use the Huskbuster. However, that is a part of the scavenger section of the expansion section. So if you don't have the Huskbuster and you don't want to recruit it, but you do have a Stampede, it'll be a literally identical option if you want to go ahead and use it. And this is a major change from that 12.0 update, because the shotguns weren't that high on my list initially, but now that they have gotten the buff that they have gotten, shotguns are extremely powerful, and this would be the number 1 weapon in the entire game if I didn't have something else to show you. Shotguns are extremely powerful. I use them very regularly, even in the highest zones, and I'm not even kidding you with the Stampede. This is not just a compromise because this is the base game version. It literally is tied with the best shotguns in the game. So if you have the Stampede or the Huskbuster and you haven't used them, they are very good. I know a lot of people have the name Ground Pounder in their head. I know that a lot of people have been saying that it's the best shotgun in the game. It's not. They actually have about the same DPS in the end. The Ground Pounder does less damage per bullet with a higher fire rate, and the Huskbuster does more damage per bullet with a lower fire rate. But once you factor in the time spent reloading, they are identical. They are the same option. I personally prefer the Ground Pounder, but the Stampede is an amazing weapon, and I don't want you to think any less of it just because of my personal opinion. Now, the number one slot is almost more of an announcement than anything else. The Thrasher is literally the strongest SMG in the game. I'm going to have to show some math on screen because I know a lot of people won't believe that. The Silent Spectre and Bobcat are two SMGs that are effectively tied. They were tied with the Hacksaw in my number 2 slot in my top 10 weapons video previously because they were the best SMGs in the game. They're still amazing, obviously. They didn't just stop doing damage all of a sudden. They are extremely powerful weapons and they are hard to beat. But that sneaky 12.0 update gave the Thrasher a very significant damage increase. It went from a base 24 damage to a base 31 damage, giving it the extra damage it needed to be about 7.3% stronger than the Silent Spectre. When you consider the fact that it actually has a higher accuracy and the fact that it achieves this damage by having more damage per bullet and a lower fire rate, meaning you'll be killing faster and reloading less often, it is decisively the best SMG in the game, and personally, I think the best base game weapon in the game. Again, I know that the launchers are on this list as well, so there are a lot of different use cases for a lot of different weapons. In plenty scenarios, the Stampede can be a perfectly better weapon if you're running this, but I wanted this top list here, this tippity top of the list to be SMGs, ARs, rocket launchers, shotguns, and melees. I don't know if you've noticed that I've done that, but I wanted to give everything their time in the spotlight. It has to be ranked because it says top 10 in the title, but every weapon I've mentioned today is a very good weapon, and I don't want my specific ordering to get in the way of that. I personally think the Thrasher might just be the best weapon in the game. I've been using it as my main primary ever since I made that video, and I have not regretted it for a second. This thing shreds. I cannot stress that extra damage per bullet enough, because even though it has a lower fire rate, I'm finding myself reloading less often. It's a lot more ammo efficient, so ironically, it's actually cheaper to use. If you want to talk about cost, there's also the Riptide. Now, unfortunately, the Riptide is a little bit weird. It's the only scavenger weapon that I'm aware of that actually has less damage than the Thrasher. This might change in the future. If so, then disregard what I'm saying here, but as of now, it has a 3% less damage per bullet than the Thrasher, and every other stat is the same. It has less durability like all scavenger weapons, and the impact is negligible, but ultimately the Riptide is 3% less damage, but more cost-effective to use. So if you don't want to spend as much Sunbeam or, anything that goes into crafting this thing, then you can use the Riptide. It's a perfectly good option. It's literally the same, but the Thrasher is actually better damage, and of course, the Riptide is a part of the scavenger section, and the Thrasher is base game, hence the title. So that's it, you guys. That is my top 10 list for the best non-event weapons in Fortnite Save the World. Let me know what you think in the comments below if you guys have any things to say. Maybe you disagree with my list. Maybe I should have put something up there that I didn't mention. But before you comment anything like that, let me get into some honorable mentions so I can hopefully clear some of that up. First and foremost, I want to mention the Hunter Killer. This is a good weapon. If this was your go-to weapon that you were about to comment on, it's a great weapon. Don't worry about it for a second. The Hunter Killer is really just more of a semi-auto weapon. I don't think those weapons have a place in the top tier weapons in a game. I know that I put the Super Shredder on this list, and I was considering tying it with the Hunter Killer, but it's really just like less DPS than the Siegebreaker, and it requires you to tap for every bullet, so it can be a lot more effective in killing enemies in 2, 3, 4 shots instead of spamming like an AR, and it might save you ammo in the long run, but I didn't think its playstyle suited a top 10 weapons list, but it is a perfectly comparable weapon that you should totally consider using. I also wanted to mention the Razorblade. It's not my favorite thing when people send me whispers because, as I'm recording, it'll immortalize it in the bottom left of the screen for the entire video, but the Razorblade is a good topic, so I appreciate Alex Allen for bringing it up. It is not a great weapon. It wasn't a great weapon before the changes, and it's not a great weapon afterwards, seeing as they changed literally nothing about it. This might be some people's favorite weapon, and I would love a G36 to be a good weapon, but it's just not. I haven't really looked at it after the changes because it hasn't changed at all, so if they buff this thing in the future, then maybe it's worth another look, but as of now, I think the collection book is where this thing should stay. As for the shotguns, I want to mention the Bear and subsequently the Longarm Enforcer, and I believe this is the Nightclaw. So the problem is this weapon does less damage than the Bear and shoots slower, and then the Nightclaw does, I think, less damage than the Bear and also shoots slower. So the Bear is basically just quite literally a better version of both of those weapons, and because it's kind of a pump fire weapon, I didn't think it had a place on this list, but it certainly does have a place in your repertoire if you want a fun shotgun to use. I highly recommend the Bear. It got a massive buff after the 12.0 changes, and it's certainly worth considering if you've never used this weapon before. I mentioned it at the start of the video, and here's the Typewriter. It's a little bit worse than the Siegebreaker. That's pretty much where it's at. It's got less fire rate, higher damage per bullet, perked exactly the same. It is kind of just a not great weapon. It's something you can use. It'll do damage. I like the Typewriter. I've always liked it as a weapon. I think it's got a cool style, but while the other weapons got buffed with the update, it got hardly touched, and seeing as you can't even research it, like I said, I didn't really want to put this on the list for that reason alone anyway. I do think in the future there's a chance that they'll make this weapon researchable, so it will technically be considered base game, and if that's the case, then I would recommend trying it out, but maybe don't make it all gold. It's not really going to do a ton in the end game. Maybe in the 100 zones and less. If you're in Plankerton, Stonewood, Candy, and you're using this weapon, it's going to be great. I think it's a fun weapon and totally worth some of your attention, but ultimately it does fall off in the end, and I don't think it's going to be that great in the end game. And that's where I'm going to call the video, ending it on the entire pistol section because none of these weapons are really that great or something I wanted to put on the list. I'm sorry. I know a lot of people like the Tiny Instrument of Death or the Freedom's Herald, and as an explosive close-range weapon, they can be very effective. The Bolt has Pierce, which used to be unique, but it's not unique anymore, and that could be good in the early game, but good in the early game doesn't make it the best in the game. So that's it, everybody. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know what you might want to see in the future. Subscribe if you're new. These videos take a lot of work. And use code Mista at your checkout. I really do appreciate it. It helps support the channel so I can make more of these videos. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching, and have a nice day. And then...